Thank you. Okay, I've taken on a really easy task today. I thought I'd make life easy for myself, and I'm going to try and talk to you about a possible alternative to our current economic model. And I must be either crazy or utopian, but I'm certainly not an economist, which makes this slightly more difficult. But I'm actually an environmentalist, and I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a little bit of a dreamer. And I work for an organization, and over time we've realized we can't solve the major environmental issues unless we start to fundamentally change our economy. So this is why we started down this road, and we've started to realize also that we're not alone. If you go to Spain, for example, or if you go to Greece, of course you're going to find people there who reject the current economic system. But it's not just in those countries that are feeling the difficulties of our time. Also in Germany, for different reasons, the people are skeptical of our current economic system. And this report that just came out in Germany also talks about Brazil and China and this growing skepticism with our current economic model. So we get to this point where we say, okay, there's a problem, and now what? So as well as growing skepticism, there's also growing kind of innovations, growing new models. And I want to talk to you about that side of the coin today. And I'm going to use Lou Brown and her project to introduce to you some of the things that I think are features of a new and emerging kind of economic model. Now, Lou Brown saw in her neighborhood there was lots of gardens that were overgrown. People weren't looking after their gardens because they were ill or too old or too busy. And she knew people that needed access to land. So she created this matchmaking service, and it was popular. People loved it. Before you knew it, it grew. It changed into a website called Landshare. And before you knew it, we've got 70,000 people registered sharing their land. And the features that Lou's project have as an integral part of a project and are also an integral part of this new economy that we're seeing is this idea of networks, the idea of access rather than ownership, the idea of sharing, the idea of collaboration. So this idea of collaboration isn't anything new. Already within the economy, there's the cooperative movement, and it's an integral part of our economy. We just don't really notice it. It's not a very apparent part of our economy. In the US alone, there's 30,000 cooperatives delivering food, energy, water, and around the world, there are now more people working for cooperatives than there are working for multinationals. So it's an integral part of our current economic DNA. And I'd just like to say it's like a sleeping giant, and it's slowly awakening. 2012 was the UN's United Nations Year of the Cooperative. And as part of that year, there were lots of events with the cooperative organizations getting to know each other and kind of awakening to their own potential. An example of just, there's lots of ways that cooperatives are different from traditional kind of corporate entities, but one example is the Mondragon cooperative in the Basque region of Spain. And one of the things we see with cooperatives is just how resilient they can be to shocks like economic downturns. So this example shows the area where the Mondragon cooperative is. It's actually a set of 200 cooperative enterprises. That area has considerably less unemployment than the rest of the country. Okay, now cooperatives, they've been around for 170 years. They are not going to create a new economic model. What we need for a new economic model is something that makes the old model obsolete. So I'm going to introduce to you the information economy. Now, you've probably heard many, many times that we're now in the information economy. But what does that mean to our economics? I'm going to try and introduce that to you. So in the beginning, we had hunter and gatherer economics. The two main components are tribes and land. We shift our economy completely to an agricultural system where the new components are land plus labor, and then the kind of organizational structures are tribes and institutions. Now, these institutions are things like empires, governments, corporations. Then we have a new revolution, a completely new economic system, and we have the new kind of economic input is capital. And it's not that land and labor disappear, it's just that capital becomes the overarching, most powerful economic element in the kind of mixture. And our new organizational component becomes the international markets. So finally, we're sitting on this cusp between these two worlds, the old industrial economy and the new information economy. And that's why we're seeing these kind of certain disruptions going on. Now, the new components that the information economy bring to us are information, of course, that's the economic component, and we're seeing the organizational components as networks. And what I want to try and do to you now is introduce a few places where we're already seeing the information economy disrupting and making obsolete the industrial economy. And the most apparent place where we have the information economy is of course, online. And open source technologies is something that we see online. Collaborative consumption and also peer-to-peer technologies are the two or three things that I'm going to talk about now. So one thing we notice in the information economy, sharing adds value. In the industrial economy, scarcity is what added value. So these are completely different principles. They don't coexist perfectly. So a good example of a disruption is the famous example of Wikipedia. Within a very few amount of years, the old industry of the encyclopedia industry, which was built on proprietary ownership models, was disintegrated. Another example of disruption in the old economy, hoteliers, the hotel group, Hilton Group, took 100 years to reach a point of its size. It's now the biggest hotel group in the world. Airbnb has a completely different format. They don't have hotels. They just provide access to people who have spare rooms, spare castles, or spare houses. And you can just connect with them directly. You don't need to have that kind of central infrastructure. And what's very interesting about Airbnb is it's a mixture of the old economy and the new economy. So you have hierarchies. Within Airbnb, the organization itself has management and hierarchies and all these other things. But they use networks as their core tool of accessing the markets. And so this is the interesting thing. One economy doesn't necessarily mean the complete annihilation of the old economy. It's those companies that know how to use best the mix of the old and the new that will be the most successful. Another example of disruption is peer-to-peer finance. Now, in the UK, Zopa is an example of a peer-to-peer finance organization. It just matches people who have money with people who need to borrow money. And recently, the Bank of England, one of the directors, said that he believed this peer-to-peer financing models could challenge the current financial institutions. So we're seeing this kind of another area of disruption. An amazing area of disruption is Linux and Windows. What we've seen is Windows in year 2000 had 97% of the market share. Now, we're using tablets and smartphones and things, and Linux, which is the basis of Android, is the most popular computing software in the UK and the US, and it's taking up a huge portion of the marketplace. So we're seeing this kind of disruption all over the marketplace. And what we're also seeing is this core theme that no longer is it survival of the fittest, me against you. It's right now is the people or the companies that can collaborate best are far stronger than those that can't. So all of this is all well and good. Great, let's imagine there's going to be a new economy. But unless it addresses the core issues of climate change and peak oil and resource depletion, for me personally, it's of no use to us. So this is the area that I am most interested in, and I work for an organization called Transition Network, and I work specifically on a project that kind of tries to understand the emergence of this new economy. The Transition Network is essentially a network of 2,000 community groups all across the world. And I try to support community groups in setting up new kinds of enterprises that use different ways of relating to each other economically. So very much in this idea of trying to compete with, to deal with climate change, we see people setting up community shops. There's about 200 of these community shops, again using these kind of collaborative processes. We see people setting up community currencies. Where I live in the UK, one of the community currencies that was set up, the mayor of Bristol, a city with 500,000 people, the mayor of Bristol is now taking all of his salary in this community currency, the Bristol pound. We see these kind of community farms where you use a model called community-supported agriculture. And it's a great model where the people who are buying the products also take a risk. They share the risk and the produce. So if there's a drought, everybody's in it together, as it were. And this CSA model, there's 8,000 of these in the USA. Lots of people are using their spare financial resources to invest in solar panels with a return on investment. Again, community models. So, and this is an interesting one. Instead of buying a bus ticket everywhere you go, you can have a membership to a bus kind of community, and then you just jump on and off whenever you want to. So this is a really interesting thing, but what I want to try and say is, I talked about 3 different movements. One is the cooperative movement, quite an old movement. One is this innovational kind of collaborative movement online. And one is this, what I call the change maker movement. And each of these provide integral ingredients to a possible new alternative. Without one or the other, there is no credible alternative. The cooperative movement provide hundreds of years of experience, of credibility, of size. They're huge. The collaborative movement provides that disruptive innovation that means that the old economy becomes obsolete. And finally, the change maker movement provides that kind of ethical, deep-rooted solutions providing motivation. So I think collectively, these provide us with a credible alternative to our current economic model.